racial equity is a very important topic, just not now as it's people through no fee assistance. However, when it comes to racial inequity in our history in America, with redlining and all of the other things, which the analogy of monopoly has been used, people of color have been not included in the game of monopoly, and we've passed go multiple times, not collected $200. And sometimes the only way that we receive help is if we collect it after coming out of jail. So it's very important in various jurisdictions. So I have on my Texas Homeless Network shirt right now. That's one of the groups that I advocate with. I'm not paid staff. I'm a volunteer there. I'm also a volunteer with Texas Housers. And the list goes on and on with the places that I volunteer. So it's important for people with lived experiences, residents, as well as people that have lived experiences with homelessness, to have equity and equitable compensation when we contribute with our knowledge, when we contribute with our ideas, when we contribute with our lived experiences. So I'm hoping today, did you want me to introduce the 3 questions that will be posed in the breakout group, Kyle?
That's fine, yeah. And I'll put them in the chat.
Okay, awesome. So for those of you that are advocating, those of you that have set on boards, what I encourage you to do is what I've done is I reach out to organizations, and often I ask them, what's your internal racial equity audit? And if they don't have an answer, then I encourage you to continue to pursue that. And for some of them, like the Food Service Network, Food Sustainability Leadership Network, they've actually come up with, for those of you looking for racial equity facilitation, they're actually going to do a facilitation training. And the important component of it is not only to have people with lived experience and residents trained, but there's paid compensation to become a facilitator. So we're looking forward to having a robust conversation to find out what's working in different jurisdictions and to have some actionable items. The purpose of today is not to just have more of the same with respect to conversation. And with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, there's a plethora of data. And so that is why I reached out to them. But hopefully at the end of today, we will have some actionable items, and we will challenge each other to meet up again in a month, 2 months, 6 months, and to see what has changed and how people with lived experience and residents, especially BIPOC, are being included in meaningful, equitable ways. So our first question that we would like for you all to consider today is to imagine, what would racial equity look like in your community? The second question, how do you see inequities appear in housing and homelessness in your community? The third question, what do you envision as both emergency and long-term solutions to the housing crisis? And incorporated in all of those, we should continue to be thinking about, how can we ensure that people with lived experiences are leading these efforts? And what I would say, leading these efforts doesn't just mean us being on a board, but us being set up with capacity and building so that we can be leaders in those organizations and we could have paid positions and not just a title.
Fantastic. That was great, Nakia. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to set up some breakout rooms and have an NLIHC staffer and Nakia as a moderator of those breakout rooms. And I'd like you all to discuss these questions. Also, as just some housekeeping, if you want to have your camera on, you can, but don't feel like you have to. But please be respectful of each other. I don't think I have to tell you all that, but since you all don't really know each other that well, but I think this is a good way for you all to connect with each other. And like Nakia said, maybe we can reconnect and give updates on things we worked on in our communities. So give me 1 second while I figure out the tech for the breakout rooms. Okay. Okay. Wait, Olivia or Kent or Tori, why I don't see my name on here.
That's because you are in charge of the, like, you're the main host. So I think you're NLIHC. I think you can assign yourself a room, although Olivia might know better on that.
I think you can join a room after you assign all of them.
Okay. Yeah, there's one room that doesn't have a staffer, room 3, and so I'll join that room.
Before we
Okay.
break off, oh, I just saw Rasta Muhammad has his hand up for a question.
Oh, sure. Hi there, Rasta. Feel free to ask your question. I think you can unmute yourself.
Oh.
Okay. Well, the rooms are open, so yes, if you could please join.
Could you resend me the invitation? I didn't join so that I could hear Ross's question, Kyle.
It says you're in room 5, Nakia.
It gave me the join option and then I didn't accept it. So is this 5?
Oh, my dad just joined.
Welcome, fellow Texan.
Yeah, that's right. Hey, Dad. Yeah, Nakia, I'm sorry. I don't know why. Maybe this is 5, but
because I know in some they are able to like let you rejoin, because I've bounced from rooms to rooms during like one of our environmental justice meetings. Like I joined and then I hopped in another room, but I wasn't the moderator, so I don't know how. Maybe I should have just hit join. I was trying to hear Ross's question.
okay. So Olivia's not in a room. So how about I move you to room 4? You should get a thing now. Did you get one?
No. Ay, Dios me. No, I don't
know what's going on. It says one of your things is joined, but the other one is
maybe
not.
it's I sent someone invite in there in the room. I don't know.
Olivia said she's in her room alone.
Oh. Well, if she wants to rejoin us, I can certainly share here.
This is not going as well as I thought it would.
Such is the world of Zoom. Expect the unexpected.
That's true. And yeah, I don't know how I can join a room. Hey.
Hey.
Should we just make this a room?
Yeah, I don't know what was happening with mine, but
Nakia, sorry. I was saying Nakia couldn't join one.
Really? I was trying to assign you to one, Nakia.
Yeah, if you want to try to reassign, because I was trying to listen to Ross's question, so I didn't join initially. So if you can resend it, or I'm open to sitting with you all and discussing either way.
Olivia, there's no one in room 1 from staff.
That's where I.
Oh wait, no, Noah is.
Noah.
Noah is.
Yeah. I don't know how to reassign. So honestly, I mean, Nakia, you could do this room, and Kyle and I can just.
No one's in room 5, Olivia,
Oh, should I join that?
from staff.
Here, I can.
How do you join?
So actually, Nakia, you might be able to do this. If you click on breakout rooms at the bottom. Do you see it at the bottom of your screen?
Oh yeah, I had to hit more. So there it is. All right.
If you click on that, you should be able to jump into like room 5. Nice.
What do you click to join?
Just join. It should be next to room 5.
It doesn't say that for me.
You might
Oh,
not.
it does. You have to hover over the number.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, do we want to?
Room 3 doesn't have anybody.
Okay, I can go there.
Yeah,
Did
there
you get
isn't
kicked
anyone.
out?
No, I left. There was only one person. I mean, I
Oh.
could rejoin if there's anyone in there, but I mean, it was just me, solamente. So it was.
Okay. I'm going to. You can join whichever one you want. Let me see if there's one that doesn't have a staffer currently. So room 5
Hello?
doesn't have a staffer. Hi there. How are you doing?
Good. I got patched into here and then I had to call in. I didn't want to use the audio because then it gets a little bit computery.
Sure. So have you been on Tenant Talk Live before? Have you joined
Yes.
us? So we're doing something a little different today. You'll see in the chat there's some discussion questions, and we're assigning people to breakout rooms randomly to discuss those questions, and then we're going to come back and have just a larger discussion. So I can assign you to a room, and yeah, just feel free to talk about those questions.
Okay.
Thank you for joining.
Yes. Nakia, how about you and I? You
TY.
join. Do what?
TY. UNITY.
Oh. I'm gonna assign some people to a room. Okay. So yeah, Nakia, how about you and I join room 5?
Sounds good. Let's see, breakout room. It's still showing me 4. Hi, Gary. How are you doing today? See, I guess Kyle, are you coming back?
Hi,
Okay.
sorry I was late.
Oh, no worries.
How
Better
is
late than
everyone?
never. And Kyle's not in here, so can someone admit Debbie? And should I? It went away. I'm not a host. So, Carrie, are you staff? Are you a tenant, resident, or?
I am a housing specialist here with Grant Integrated Services in Moses Lake. Moses
and
Lake,
Mo-
Washington.
Moses Lake, Washington.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Well, until we have Kyle, we could discuss the topics, the questions, and Chantel. Chantel is gone, so guess not. Just I don't know, but I don't know.
I went into a breakout room. I thought someone wanted the invite to this meeting, and it popped me into another one.
In world of Zoom. So I will, I guess, try to email
Hard to
Kyle. I'm not sure. I think they want staff in the rooms when we're discussing the topics. I'm not sure. Main
Where are
room.
you from, Nakia?
Wait, thank you for asking. I am originally from Houston, Texas, and that is where I still reside. And I just recently visited Austin.
Very cool. What is your what's your role there? Forgive me, your credentials might already be on the invite, and I got in here late, so I got super nervous. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. My credentials are I am a resident that is an advocate that is advocating for racial equity. As a tenant, I have a wealth of different skills, not just as a resident and a tenant, but just as a houser. So I've worked legislative capacity. I worked at a law firm. I worked as a fair houser in Austin. That's when I really got interested in housing and how fair housing. And then on the other end of it, having lived experience with homelessness and seeing just how, with the system and within systems, how there's always room for improvement, especially to hear the voice of people that are on the end of, the services. So
Absolutely.
that's my role, but I'm with Texas Homeless Network. I'm an advocate. We have the Housing Day on April 7th. Also work with a few other organizations just as a volunteer, which is why I advocate for racial equity, because there are only so many hours in a day. And opportunity costs means that when you're doing that one thing, you're not doing something else. So, no.
Awesome. How many years have you been doing housing specific? I've just been here since February, so I'm really new.
You're green.
Yeah, great.
So 2003 or 4 was when I first became familiar with the Austin Tenants Council or Tenants. I forget the last Tenants Union. One of those. It's been over 2 decades almost. But that's when I did the Fair Houser Tester, and I would just go in, and I have a background in theater too, so you get to act like you're trying to rent an apartment and see if they give you the same, price, the same availability, for someone that's, a person of color, and then they would have someone go in that wasn't. So just got introduced to that. But the being on the housing wait list for 5 years for public housing is how I became familiar with kind of some of the nuances and intrinsic, I can't say that word, but how difficult from RAD to public housing to all of those things is how I kind of got familiar with that. But for our topic today with racial equity, I think it's just going to so many different organizations. And Matthew Desmond, are you familiar with the book on eviction or evicted? Have you heard of Matthew Desmond?
Oh, me? I
Yeah.
thought you were speaking to someone. I apologize. No, I've not heard of
Oh, no.
Matthew Desmond.
Yeah, he has a book, it's Evicted, and he's a researcher and I think sociologist. And his book, he just researched, and I think he actually went in with people and just kind of studied their lives from the process of being evicted. And this was before the pandemic. And so he coined the term how Black men are locked up and Black women are locked out. And so just looking at the processes of children and how being evicted was normalized, and just his research contributed to a lot, I think, of what people say as far as with emergency rental assistance and a lot of the things that advocates promote right now. I just think the missing component from my perspective is a lot of times the researchers who are researching the communities of color, the advocates, a lot of times they don't tap into the resources right within community. So for me as a person, not only with lived experience, but, with a law degree and with public policy experience, it becomes very frustrating if your opportunity is a one-time rental assistance. And then you're meeting people who have long-term jobs and 5-10 years from now have houses, and I'm still, in the same situation. So I believe in something called targeted universalism. And it's not about I guess the way to articulate it is it looks at people's individual experiences. And so it's not you have universal policy goals. And so, for example, in housing, it would be to house all people. So you wouldn't just say, well, there are more Black people, that are evicted, so we're going to give more emergency rental assistance, because that messaging and that imaging, is, I think, that plays into some of the stereotypes, but it's targeted to see, what individuals actually need. And so that's also called racial equity 2.0. So that's.
I'm getting more familiar with the topic, and we just received an email here from, I believe it was an HCA email that is saying with the pandemic that a lot of the eviction and things that are coming down. So let me go back step one little bit. Washington State has stayed the non-eviction order for another 3 months.
Okay.
Because we're just here in Washington, where we are kind of coming out of the pandemic. I understood by talking to a contact I have in Texas that your state didn't actually shut down as much as ours did. Everything shut there, and we're kind of really slowly coming back into a creeping, crawling, things opening back up. As far as that impact of racial equity and the housing aspect, we were given a government ordered stay. So those individuals that are back on rent, that are owing on rent and things like that, they are able to tap further into that service for a little bit longer. I don't yet know the impact of payment. I don't know who's paying the rent, how are they helping them, what my role is going to be. And Washington State has a further underserved demographic that it's actually very, very difficult to find resources for, and that's the Native population. In Washington State, we have a large number of Native Americans that still reside here that are really unsung in terms of their access to programs and things like that for rent assistance. And further, where agriculture, specifically to Eastern Washington, is where I'm from. Our state is very divided. We have high industry on the west side, Seattle side, and everything else on the east side. And that's half of our state as far as land mass is agricultural. So we attract migrant and seasonal farm workers that then also their factories shut for COVID. They're out of jobs. They're here. They have families here. Everybody's working in the ag industry that just came to a screeching halt a year ago. What do we do with all those housing too? They're largely from Mexico and South America, came up here to Washington to follow the ag trend that have been displaced here as well. My role specifically isn't tied into those bigger pieces, but we're feeling it here too.
But it's great that you're connected, because it is about the systems as well. And so do you, within your community, you've kind of touched upon the inequities with the native population and the migrants. What would you envision as far as with emergency long-term solutions to the housing crisis? Do you see advocacy for those communities with specific groups, or there are groups that you could name that would say, hey, this is a resource to tap into maybe some of those gaps in connecting services to those populations and people?
I'm becoming more familiar with it, and I am unfortunately not able to step too far out of my lane. Eventually, I would hope to say, as a Washingtonian and an advocate for equal housing opportunity, I would like to see more outreach because we're so spread out here, especially in Eastern Washington. My county, specifically Grant County, I could be wrong on this, but it has seemed a little bit of a competition for those grants. We got to be able to reach for them, know them, and so having the education for the people like myself that's going to put that in the hands of the client to serve them. With COVID, it really set us back in terms of our connection to other people and programs. And then, of course, coming in first on those and putting the power back to the people to access those programs. So where are they? Myself, I don't actually know how to put it together yet, but I'm figuring it out. Mine is kind of an FCS referral program to me. But your question ties into the greater picture, as it should. How do we grow this information? I think it's just simple outreach. Got to advertise somehow so that people know that it's there and they know who to talk to. A lot of people are working from home. We just got to find a way to get it connected, get it to the hands of the people that need it the most.
Are there any like climate, because I know, and here locally it would be a different population, but I was on a call. It's a coalition for SEER, environmental resilient. I'm probably missing some of the acronyms, but they had presenters. It was a 4-part series, and they had a Native population and presenters, and they would give us solutions of this is the help that we need. So I'm wondering, and I know you may not have capacity, and I think that's usually where, just, linking to other organizations and that interconnection, where people that may be their cause and that they may already be tapped into those groups, in that way.
It's true, because those areas are far reaching from my own here. Yakima County is south of us, and they have, a tremendous amount of access and a tremendous outreach effort. So individuals can go to almost any work source or churches and things like that. So that's a smaller community, and the advocates like you and myself are much more versed in, or not much more, but they're very versed in each other's program to kind of work as a multidisciplinary team. The other Native population would be out on the west coast of Washington. And I don't actually have a sense or a feel for their advocacy groups, although it is the larger metropolitan area. They're closer to Seattle. I'm going to guess that they likewise have a great outreach structure and a marketing structure to let folks know what the resources are. So my program is actually 2 years old ish, right about there. And so we're getting really dialed in as COVID happened and kind of changed a lot of things. So the umbrella of funding remains sort of the same, but now it's just connecting the clients back to services, because for a long time they really haven't been able to access, other than telehealth, which is kind of the mental health component of it. They weren't able to access. Sorry, I keep going on and on.
No. I love learning. So I'm the type of person, I'm going to be looking up Grant County and looking up the indigenous population. So, I mean, I'm like, love learning about other communities, because it's, it's such a different thing. And sometimes it's unique. And then there's some things that, overlap. So yeah, I love learning. So please
what's your
share.
What's the biggest challenge for you all out there right now with housing?
Well, I mean, I think it means different things to different people. So if you're talking to, like, for example, Texas housers, and I think Billy spoke earlier today. I didn't get to hear it, but for them, they've been tracking, like, with the CDC moratorium, and they have court watchers programs, seeing if there's consistency from judges and just people that are not aware, our system here in Texas, not just with evictions, but also with housing. So with public housing, I mean, I understand the perspective of landlords. I have like a real estate background. So, and I understand, like, if you're a small landlord. So I try to not have this just so pro tenant where you're not actually understanding, the other side as well. So I think for them, it's, people being aware, judges, and then they're just also being like consistency. So from their court watchers program, you may watch one judge that is, kind of maybe helping the tenant a little bit, and then others where if the tenant's not aware, they may qualify, for the moratorium, but they haven't filled out a piece of paperwork. So then, they don't get the help, or the funds are there. So that may be one thing for them. For Texas Homeless Network Coalition, they have a lot of things that they're advocating for. But for me, what sticks out is source of income, because for some people, the solution to housing is housing. I think a lot of people with the rental, I'm more of an advocate where I think that it should not just be a temporary thing. So with rental assistance, once again, you're assisting people, and right now there's more funding available for some people in some, jurisdictions. But what happens when, COVID is over? Those, resources aren't going to be there. So it's just this cycle where people that were evicted, are now facing eviction again. So I think those are some of the things, but within the context of racial equity, I think sometimes just the messaging of who's impacted by something changes people's perspective of the need. So the no fault of their own is like the message right now. So we should give funding, we should give help because it's no fault of their own. And my concern is that once the pandemic ends and some people are back to work, there's still people that earn below, like the migrant workers and the people that you mentioned that are working very hard. But is it, living wages? Are these wages where people would be able to afford an apartment and electricity and food? And so I think someone joined and then she stepped.
Yeah, I saw that too. That was
Like,
crazy.
pop in, pop out. And I think next time somebody pops in, I'll close my mouth and be like, "Help!" What are your thoughts on racial equity in your yeah. So yeah, it's a conversation. It's just so actionable items. What do you, I guess, what would your takeaway? Because you mentioned like funding and those type of things. What do you think, I guess, are the biggest actionable items when it comes to racial equity and inclusion of, like you mentioned, the indigenous population and just BIPOC people that are either serve clients or that are within community that might be advocates?
I beg your pardon. You're asking about the client advocates. Who do I think those people are?
Yeah, how do you think, I think the fourth question I'm trying to find for inclusion of those, people with lived experience, what do you think are ways that they can be included? And not just, I guess for me, and not just the receiving end of I'm getting help, but how can they be included in like more long-term, impactful, meaningful ways?
Well, that's a really good question. It makes me ponder measurable success gains. I think if we have more stories of how the programs can be very successful, start to finish, the enrollment process, the assistance, you go from a rent assistance to more of a permanent housing situation. If we kind of just throw a bunch of those into the mix and host a webinar or something where the clients can actually give us their lived experience about how they were able to engage, get the services they need, pinpoint those points of contact throughout their journey that were especially helpful, and invite all of those entities to that meeting to see where their place is in the overall picture of success. I think if we can't meet face to face, we might as well go into the Zoom world and really invite those clients and those presenters like yourself and the other advocates that exist to really strengthen the message that just because we can't meet like we used to anymore does not mean the resources are gone. In fact, there's so much greater availability. How can we get those to you, I suppose? And then each of us is connected to our own network of people, the people we work with in our jobs, the friends that we have. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize so many people are here. And then
Doing great.
let's just invite everybody to keep talking about it, get the information out there, because like it or not, we're in the situation where we don't know when we're going to be able to come back and meet with everybody. That doesn't mean that their situation isn't serious right now, and they need access to us, and they need access to all of the other pieces that are going to get them housing, right? How can we make ourselves available to them?
Carrie, I don't really know what you're talking about, but it sounds awesome.
She was answering the latter question about inclusion. So she discussed the unique situation in Grant County, and specifically with the Native American and the migrant population. And so one of the things which she touched upon, which is important, is going from rental assistance to permanent supportive housing. And I definitely agree with that part. And I would probably challenge, I know you're new to the organization, challenge each organization to look, I'm an advocate for peer support specialists. And when there are grant and funded opportunities, to make concerted efforts to look within communities, that are served for those opportunities. Because I love our Texas organizations, but often there are some missed opportunities to do that. Thank you very much, Carrie.
Thanks. How long have y'all been here? I thought it was just me and Nakia this whole time.
I was going to say, so Nakia, did you end up not getting a room? You just talked to Carrie?
Well, I didn't just talk to Carrie. I would rephrase that.
Sorry.
I was fortunate enough
had
to
the
learn.
the privilege of talking to
Yes,
Carrie.
the privilege and the honor to speak with Carrie one-on-one. And we had a few people pop in and they popped out. So I'm not sure why, but yeah.
I'm glad you're able to discuss. Okay, so I think everyone's back. Hi, everyone. If you joined late, you're probably a little confused on what's going on, but this Tenant Talk Live was a little bit different this time. I wanted to have some group discussions, hence the breakout rooms. I apologize for any technological difficulties. It was my first time doing this, so hopefully it'll go smoother if we do this again. But now I'd love to talk about some takeaways that you all had in your discussions. And I can start with mine. I was with Patricia, Carrie, Rodney, and Angel Jackson. And we talked a lot about kind of holistic community upgrades. We need grocery stores, we need drugstores, community centers, things, it's not just about the housing, it's about like creating a community and like a fabric of that community. And something that stood out to me in my discussions was something Carrie pointed out when asking about how do we make this a tenant-led movement. She said that we need to get tenants housed first. They need to be healthy and safe to be good advocates. So I think that's a really good point to remember. We discussed TOPA, the tenant opportunity to purchase. I think it's common in some cities. I know I live in DC and most of the other staff do, and I think they're all kind of familiar with it, but it's the ability for a tenant whose apartment is being sold to purchase it, have the right to purchase it first. And so we said that could be, a tool in the toolbox. I mentioned our house campaign. We want to have everyone who needs a voucher to get it. And I think that goes into what Carrie was saying about, getting people housed so they can be good advocates. So Nakia and Carrie, do you all want to, since you all had a one-on-one, do you want to talk about some of the takeaways you had?
Carrie, do you want to share or conclude or summarize?
I think Nakia and I became acquainted with our respective programs, and we discussed some of our greatest challenges for the areas that we were in. My area is very specific, Grant County, but I had mentioned, some of the outlying areas. Our topic is, of course, racial equity in housing. And so I think actually Nakia has a ton more experience to answer that question. If you wouldn't mind, Nakia, can you take over?
Sure, no, and I appreciate that. I'll just touch upon, we didn't talk about source of income discrimination. That's one of the kind of some of the advocacy here in Texas. We don't have TOPA, unfortunately, so you all may have data on how much that actually happens. when we talk about the unique populations and subsets, I guess my concern, I may have articulated it, is once again, it's emergency assistance and it's kind of this cycle and it's this one-time thing. Carrie talked about outreach. So some of the demographics, especially with the Native population, some of the suggestions that I gave, we have SEER here, which I'm messing up the acronym and I spoke with them, but it's like the climate, environmental, resilience. I'm missing something. But the thing about a lot of these other, and I know you all may not have capacity, and I think some of the residents, we often may not have capacity to be at all of these things as well. But with that, if there are other organizations that may be reaching a population, like with Native American, I know our group, they presented at the environmental. So going to that group, and instead of saying, here are the resources and this is how we're going to allocate, I think there should be more opportunities where the resources are given within or to the community, and the community decides via peer support specialists or other people, that because it becomes this paternalistic, for me, type of thing, which feeds into systemic racism. You know, you're the group that's the subgroup, and we know what's best for your community, and this is how we're going to, you know, like someone in AmeriCorps wrote an article about the white savior. This is how we're going to allocate those funds. And I think Billy spoke from Texas Housers earlier today with National Low Income Housing Coalition. So for him, for example, he finished from UT like me, but years ago in philosophy. And then Texas Housers, just like Texas Homeless Network, they hire vistas. Unfortunately, a lot of times, if you're African American or you're a minority, you're a person of color, earning very low income wages after college is something you may have to do. But as a VISTA, it's not geared towards those populations to serve within communities. And then further, if you are a VISTA or you do serve in those capacities, your experience is not looked at as value. It's this thing called subpar. When it talks about stock, that's like the one thing I remember from corporate law. And it's basically when you sell stock at this low value, right? And so often as a person of color, you're treated like subpar stock when you're not. And so I think a lot of organizations, like what Carrie talked about, outreach and talking within community, I challenge all advocates to even go further. Like, make sure that you're doing a racial equity audit, look within, look in-house and say, hey, how many Vistas fellows have we hired within our organization, or have we brought within our organization that started with no education or experience, and now they're running a nonprofit now, because we've had Texas Housers for 30 years. So I think it would be easy for them to say, we can look at and see how many people of color have come through Texas Housers, and now they're a Billy, or they're a, so I think just going that step further, Texas Homeless Network, Sam, he was a VISTA. And so now there's Nick, who was a VISTA, and there's 3 or 4 other white guys who are amazing. And so targeted universalism isn't about isolating other communities, but it's acknowledging that you're serving this community. And when you hire a data scientist, you hire a person, are you automatically looking at, friends, connections, and not looking at the residents and tenants? Because that's systemic racism, assuming that there's not the talent in community, because you're speaking to, not just because I'm a University of Texas law graduate and a national moot court champion and an Order of the Barristers champion, and they lit the UT tower for me, but I'm living in public housing and I was homeless. And it's not because of drug use, it's not because of all of these other tropes. And even if it were, there's still talent within community. And I challenge all organizations to do a better job of hiring and paying the residents, and not just having them on your boards and speaking at meetings. So that was a pretty long spiel.
Oh, that was great. Thank you, Nakia. Noah and Olivia, you're close to me. Would you like to?
Yeah, I can go first. So just in terms of the first, we only really got through the second question, but I think, our conversation was wide ranging. So I think we covered a lot of additional of that third question in there. In terms of, what does racial equity look like? I think, first off, it would be, reparations at the federal level, and additional, heavy protections to boost racial equity, such protections that in many parts of the country would only come from the federal government and not from the local or state. But looking at the statewide or city level, we kind of talked about who owns the property, who owns the infrastructure there, who owns the bones of the city, which actually kind of connects to that second question about emergency and long-term solutions, talking about how do we ensure that housing in majority Black or neighborhoods with lower incomes, like how do folks in the neighborhood retain ownership over their homes, and pushing against kind of the venture capitalist or investment style takeover of housing in those neighborhoods. Talked about internet and broadband issues, talked about like the built environment, talking about lead issues as well. I think William was talking about that issue up in Maine that was surprising to a lot of us. Also talking about something else. We were talking about something else that was good. Rent court representation as well, creating access to the legal system as a way to, that's an emergency or a long-term solution right there, is ensuring access to lawyers for rent court. Also talking about utilizing hotels or offices that may be no longer used, and trying to convert those into homes and housing. They're often in city centers. They're often, kind of close to jobs, close to transportation by nature of them being office buildings. So that would be a good solution right there. Yeah, I think that was pretty much it. So other folks from the group can correct me if I'm wrong in the chat if they'd like.
Great. Olivia, you want to go?
Yeah, and actually I'll encourage Claudia to unmute and talk about, if you're comfortable, talk about kind of like the experience of a resident council. We talked about how really when we're talking right now in the emergency and also long-term, how resident councils, tenant associations, neighbors have come together to support one another. And if we're looking for like a long-term movement, what is support for that? Those connections and communities and infrastructure that's actually already there, like what would that look like for folks that are already doing the work, like in New York. So we talked about that, and we also acknowledged, Kyle, to the same point that you talked about, that it's not just housing, it's housing and it's food, and it's housing and it's internet, and it's not just internet, it's devices, and it's multi-generational households with many people on the internet on many devices. And it is taxing on mental health, and it has to do with wages, and it has to do with jobs. So what do all those experiences look like that are not, that housing isn't in a vacuum? So I think that's like a high level of what we talked about. Anyone from my room? Claudia, we had two Claudias.
I'm here.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, I think you touched it, you hit it on the head with everything that we discussed. I was just saying that we should have a national or even a local database where if we're looking up organizations for help, just a database we can go to. That way we can identify them in our communities and know how to utilize them, as well as have them help us outreach to the residents themselves, because I find that the structure that is put in place to govern us has been failing tremendously over here. And we as resident councils, especially in New York, we have been left to our own vices.
I think we talked a little bit about something like that on the state and local implementation call, didn't we, Tori or Kim? I think 211, we had the person from 211 on, and they talked about just cataloging all of their support systems. I'm just saying, Claudia, that's a point well taken, and I think it's definitely something worth exploring. Okay. Joey, or sorry, Claudia.
Yes, I wanted to know, with all of the resources that you all have, whether or not that can be compiled into a booklet or something where the support systems that you do have knowledge of all of the resources that's available. So I know in NLIHC have a lot of resources that's great for the visitors to review, understand a little better about what's going on with their housing.
Yeah, so we have a database of all the rental assistance programs that have been enacted across the country, and I'm happy to share that with you if that'd be helpful. We don't have, all social services, but Nakia just put in the chat HUD's Find Shelter link. But yeah, happy to share that database with you if that'd be helpful. Joey, would you like to debrief? You're on mute.
So I was in a room briefly with Arnetta from Texas, and because our room was only 2 people, we got reassigned. And so I'm actually going to call on Tori, who was in the discussion room I ended up in, but she was there for the whole thing. So Tori, I don't know if anybody else from our discussion room would like to share out, but maybe you can get it started.
Yeah, I would love it if we had a lot of folks on the call. So we had, let's see, Christina Tyler in Syracuse, Heather, I'm sorry I didn't get your last name, in Austin, Texas. We had Vernua Noble in Tennessee for a little while, and then Carl Hardiman in Pittsburgh, and Sharon Sherman in Syracuse. And we talked about what does racial equity look like. We looked a lot at buildings and in communities, and looked at like small communities, and talked about what racial equity looks like there, that there's a lot of different barriers to folks in terms of like transportation, in terms of, right now people experiencing losing their Section 8 and not adhering to the moratorium. There's Christina was talking a little bit about the experiences her family have living in their building, and that I think they're in their HUD building, and that her sons and daughters face a lot of discrimination, and then looking at also in terms of like what does solutions look like, looking at training programs, equal education, looking at fixing the income issues between income and cost of housing. And then in terms of like long and short-term solutions, looking at options where nonprofits or the people kind of own the housing and create the housing, as opposed to like private groups and landlords. So I don't know, Christina, did you want to share? I see Christina Tyler's on. I don't know if you wanted to share anything additional about what we talked about.
Well, and that's fine. I appreciate that, Tori. Like I said, I'm from Syracuse, New York, at the Greater Syracuse Tenant Network. I'm a VISTA volunteer. I'm also the tenant president of my tenant association in my HUD building as well. The racial stuff that my 3 children have experienced, because they are of 2 different races, it happens a lot. A couple of my kids have a lighter skin color. One of mine is darker, but my own son, who lives in the building with me in my apartment, was actually told to leave the building because he left the building the day before without his house keys. The security guard tried to, because, we had a mask on, which is a requirement now due to COVID, and because, of his skin color, he was turned away and got upset with the security guard because the cops had been called on to something else, and my son thought that the security guard was racial profiling him, and he's only 16. So it took a lot out of him with, and of course it was like 5:30 in the morning. So it wasn't really a good time to get somebody angry. But my board of my tenant association here. It's mixed with a whole bunch of different people, different backgrounds, ages. Honestly, I think I'm the youngest on the board and I'm the tenant president. But I like the interaction. I like the difference of opinions. I like having as many different race opinions as well as just anybody's opinion. I don't care what their background is, just an opinion that's different from mine that we can share and decide what's best for the building, because my building represents a lot of different backgrounds and groups of people. So like I said, that's how I feel about it.
Thank you for sharing that, Christina. That's awful that happened to your son, but illustrates, you know, how we treat low-income renters. That definitely needs to change. Tori, did you have anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Kim, you will be
Yes.
the last to go, I believe, right? Yep.
Sure. And folks in my group, please feel free to jump in. So we had a really robust discussion about the first question. And then more folks joined. And so we just continued that conversation, and it was robust and really, I kept using the word heartbreaking, just because that's kind of the fact of the matter. So we talked about how communities can look diverse at kind of face value, but still be inequitable in the way that, you know, housing is constructed and where housing is constructed, in how affordable housing is built, and how often Section 8 properties or federally assisted housing is of lower quality than, say, housing that's available through the private market, and how affordable housing is often located in communities that aren't well connected to things like grocery stores or public transit, or medical care, and how all of that really has such a ripple effect on so many other life outcomes. And I'm actually going to invite Dr. Bambi Hayes Brown to share some of what she was talking about is going on in Georgia, instead of me just kind of, you know, giving a synopsis of what she said. Bambi, if you're still on, love to hear from you.
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
A little bit of back, but I think you're fine. Keep going.
Okay. But yes, you know, I just gave a perspective from the urban and the rural communities. And a lot of the things what other people had talked about was, of course, with Atlanta being having the largest wealth gap in the nation, is pushing people further in the south and east suburbs. And people who have an eviction filed, even though it's not gone through, are having a terrible time finding a place to stay, if they can find a place to stay. And those that are able to find a place to stay are either pushed to extended stay hotels, they have become more permanent homes, or if they can find a place that will rent to them, landlords are charging these exorbitant risk fees, quote unquote. And I've seen as much as those fees go as high as $3,000 for a risk fee, and that's non-refundable. It's not first month's rent. It's not last month's rent. It's not a security deposit. So it's a totally different fee for the landlord, quote unquote, taking a risk on renting to the individual. And so in the southern part of the state, more rural areas, where the housing stock is a lot older and there's a lot more naturally occurring affordable housing, um, people who own those homes in those communities are very well known and well respected. So the code enforcement officers will not cite them. So the homes are in poor condition, which makes the utility rates be unusually expensive. And most of the time, those utilities are higher than rents. So in some places we've seen where the rent is $400, but the utility bills may be $600 or $700 per month. And so there's a coalition in Albany, Georgia. It's the Albany Coalition for Lower Utilities. They started a coalition to combat those high utility rates that are often EMCs or county-owned utilities. So they're not like Georgia Power that's governed through the Public Service Commission. So those are some of the things that we see going on here in Georgia. Thank you.
Thanks, Bambi. And so we also talked, and I'll make this fast because I know we're at time. I don't know where that's coming from. Okay. I'll say real quickly that Anetta down in Texas was talking about how difficult it is right now, given that Texas is no longer enforcing the CDC eviction moratorium. And the fact that, you know, it's hard for people to find housing. There's a severe housing shortage all around in the state. Landlords are refusing to make repairs to housing stock, and that's a disproportionate impact on lower income people who are predominantly Black and Brown in the community that she's serving. And folks have been unable to find a place to rent because of an eviction on their record, even if that eviction wasn't ultimately carried out or the tenant was able to pay their back rent. And then the pandemic has just made everything worse and trapped folks on a hamster wheel of, you know, having an eviction filed against them and then not being able to find housing.
I have a quick question. Here in Washington, I found a program called the Landlord Mitigation Program. I think it's federal. If you all are familiar with that, has everybody plugged their landlords into that as a resource? If not, the Landlord Mitigation Fund, to just kind of piggyback on what the speaker just said, landlords can recoup a lot of their damage other than wear and tear through a federal program. They put in the first $500 and they can make a claim up to $3,000 on each property. And they just submit their walkthrough reports, anything that they would furnish to the resident at first, that walk through the pictures and the lease agreement, things like that, etc. So they can charge up to 14 days also of missed rent paid. It won't pay anything back owing, but that's at least maybe something to offset their expense or their risk. Are you all familiar with that, or is that available in your states, or is it just?
Thanks for bringing up mitigation funds. It's not federal, but it is a state program in Washington. It's also a state program in Oregon and Utah that I'm aware of, and I know a few other places, even some local jurisdictions. And one of the interesting things about mitigation funds is it definitely allows landlords to maybe step outside their comfort zone. But maybe the even cooler thing about mitigation funds is so few landlords ever actually have to take money out of the fund, because it turns out that low-income people don't trash the apartments, you know, or like a lot of those assumptions, a lot of those stereotypes just aren't true. And the mitigation funds actually are kind of proof of that, which is really interesting.
Although they can make those repairs for my client to go into. The last speaker before the two of us had mentioned that they're not quality places to rent. They're not safe. And so it doesn't have to be someone that was providing a subsidy to that landlord in order to use that program. So I'd be really interested how that type of funding translates to each of our states respectively, where we can put that in the hands of our landlords so that they are less likely to charge that risk fee. I can't even believe that's legal. Who is the speaker from Georgia that talked about the risk fee?
That was Bambi.
Gosh.
Yes, I'm here, and I do that. Yeah, I see it. Well, I saw it firsthand because I do have a real estate broker's license, so I see things before it becomes public and becomes widely known. And so I when I see these things, I bring it up and to larger audiences so that people are aware that these types of practices are happening.
Yeah. Well, I hate to cut off what has become a really good conversation, but we are 6 minutes past time. But before I did that, I wanted to call out our Housed campaign, which if you listen to our national call earlier today, we went in depth about that. So the crux of it is we are hopeful that we can urge the administration and Congress to pass legislation that would provide a voucher to everyone who needs it. Currently, only 1 in 4 people that needs a voucher receives it. We would also have an influx of cash into the National Housing Trust Fund, into the Public Housing Capital Fund as well, and several other, and we'll include some renter protections. I put it in the chat. I think Olivia just put it in again so you can see it. We would love for you all to check this out. I think it'll answer, a lot of the questions that we're having here. But just as a start, I don't think it's the full answer, but I definitely would love if everyone could check that out. And just, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of the NLIHC staff to answer that for you, and how you can get involved and help push that message. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone for your participation. I know this is a little different. I really appreciate it. I hope you all enjoyed this. And thank you so much, Nakia, for joining us and introducing a great topic. And we'll see you all next month.
Thanks for having me. Asante, sheshe.
Bye.